Las Vegas is moving, OTAs are underway, and I'll be straight with you. I didn't expect to be this genuinely invested this early in the process. Voluntary practices, no pads, limited contact, a handful of released clips. That's the reality of what we're working with right now. The conditions are far from ideal for drawing hard conclusions, but something about what the Raiders have put out from these early sessions has grabbed me, and I think it deserves real careful analysis rather than the usual off-season noise that evaporates by July. Because Fernando Mendoza is standing on an actual NFL practice field, in a Raiders uniform, throwing to Raiders receivers, and even within the narrow window of footage we have access to, there are things happening that I cannot stop thinking about. Let me be disciplined about this from the start, because I owe you that. You cannot watch an OTA highlight reel and come away with a complete picture of a quarterback's ability to process pressure. You cannot measure pocket awareness, capacity to read a disguised coverage rotation when there's no pass rush and the competitive stakes of training camp haven't arrived yet. I want to be very clear about those limits before I say anything else, because the fastest way to manufacture a bad take is to inflate what voluntary spring practices can actually tell you. That said, and this matters, what you can legitimately evaluate in this environment is ball flight, mechanical consistency, and the physical fluency of how a quarterback moves through an offense, and on those specifics looked genuinely striking. The spiral was tight, the trajectory on his throws was precise and repeatable from rep to rep, and the timing of his release had this natural, almost effortless quality that I need to stop and flag carefully, because that quality does not always survive what happens when the full cognitive weight of an NFL offense lands on a young quarterback's shoulders for the first time. Some players lose that looseness. The mental load crowds out the physical rhythm. Mendoza, at least in what we've seen, looks like the transition hasn't touched his mechanics at all. That is an early signal worth tracking very closely. Kirk Cousins also got his reps. His throw to Dante Thornton was clean, accurate, professionally executed, exactly the kind of delivery you expect from a quarterback 14 years into his career with a resume built entirely on technical reliability. Nothing was wrong with it. It was a good throw by a good quarterback. But I'm going to say something honest here, because I think you deserve the unfiltered version of this observation, rather than the version that tries to be diplomatic about something that doesn't really require diplomacy. Mendoza's release looked better, more fluid, more alive. The kind of throw that makes you sit up and start thinking about what an offense could look like around this guy for the next 10 or 12 years, rather than what a quarterback can efficiently execute for the next season or two. One of them looks like the foundation you build everything around. The other looks like the bridge that gets you somewhere. And that distinction, quiet as it is right now, buried inside voluntary spring practices with no real stakes attached, is going to sit at the absolute center of every meaningful conversation about this franchise between now and September. There's a detail buried in these early sessions that I don't think is getting nearly the analytical attention it deserves, and I want to make sure it lands before we move forward. Pay close attention to which receivers are lining up with which quarterback. The distribution of first-team and second-team personnel between Cousins and Mendoza is not some neutral administrative scheduling decision. It is one of the most honest signals a coaching staff sends about its genuine internal hierarchy. The one that actually exists, as opposed to the one being described in press conferences. Those are frequently two different things. Right now, from what we can observe, Cousins is working with the established receiver group, but the full picture requires access we don't yet have. When the open media OTA sessions begin and reporters actually get on that field, the first thing I'm looking for is how those reps are being allocated and, more importantly, whether that distribution shifts as the weeks progress. That shift, or the stubborn absence of it, will tell us more about what this coaching staff is genuinely thinking than anything Clint Kubiak says in front of a microphone. I mean that sincerely, which brings me directly to what Kubiak has said on the record, because he put something out there recently that I think deserves far more serious engagement than it's received. He stated clearly, publicly on the record, that his dream scenario, his ideal vision of how this season unfolds, is a situation where the Raiders can afford to let Fernando Mendoza sit and develop for a full year while Kirk Cousins starts and manages the offense. I want to let that sit for a moment before I respond to it. The head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders publicly identified a rookie quarterback watching from the sideline for an entire season as the best possible outcome for his team. That's the stated preference. Not a backup plan, not a contingency, the dream. And before I push back on it, and I'm going to push back on it, I want to acknowledge that the football logic underneath that position is not without merit, because ignoring the legitimate case for patience would be intellectually dishonest. An RPO-heavy college quarterback transitioning into a pro-style West Coast system is a genuinely substantial adjustment. The mental processing demands alone are enormous. Understanding how NFL defensive coordinators hide their intentions before the snap, managing protection adjustments at the line in real time, operating within the layered time timing requirements of a West Coast passing game, where every route combination is designed around specific windows that open and close in fractions of a second. These things don't automatically transfer regardless of how talented the player is. The argument for sitting a young quarterback, the real argument, not the convenient one, is that daily immersion next to a veteran who has run this exact system for a career creates a developmental runway that live game pressure during a learning year might actually damage. You absorb how a professional prepares. You watch how he studies film, manages a short week, communicates with receivers after an incompletion, carries the weight of a loss on a Thursday. Those are real transferable things. I'm not dismissing them. I've seen it work, but here is my honest counter, and I want to be as plain about this as I can. What Kubiak is calling his dream scenario is also, almost word for word, a historically accurate description of how promising young quarterbacks have had their development quietly derailed. The patient plan where the veteran plays well enough to keep the job through the season is also the plan where you finish 8-9, generate no real playoff momentum, and accumulate zero live game experience for the player who is actually supposed to be your long-term answer. And then you walk into the following offseason 12 months behind on the developmental timeline that genuinely matters. And the question becomes, what was the destination that justified the delay? What did the patience actually build toward? Because if the answer is a one-year bridge quarterback who landed you in the middle of the standings and nothing else, then the patience didn't protect the young quarterback's development. It just consumed a year of it. Here is precisely where I land on this. Kubiak's position is defensible under one very specific condition. Cousins gives this team a genuine, legitimate chance to win football games. If the Raiders are sitting at 5-3 at the midpoint of the season, competing deep into games, running an efficient and functional offense, showing real signs of playoff contention, I can live with that picture. A veteran managing a winning football team while the franchise quarterback develops behind him is an outcome I can respect. But what I will not accept, and what I think every person invested in this franchise needs to hold as a firm position, is the other version. The version where the offense stagnates, the wins stop coming, the season slowly dissolves into mediocrity, and the player who genuinely represents the future of this organization spends the entire year on the sideline without ever getting his moment. That is the scenario worth watching for with clear eyes. And the early OTA structure, Cousins running with the first group, means the risk of that outcome is real enough to be discussed honestly and directly, not smoothed over with language about developmental timelines and organizational patience. Let me move through the rest of what these OTAs are generating, because this roster has real stories developing across multiple position groups that deserve serious attention before training camp changes the frame on everything. The wide receiver room is where my focus sharpens most right now, and specifically Dante Thornton and Jack Bash, because those two players have more to gain from a productive OTA stretch than anyone else in that group, and more to contribute to what this offense can eventually become. Thornton's physical profile, the size, the straight line speed, the ability to threaten defensive backs vertically and force coordinators to allocate safety help rather than leaving a corner in isolation, that architecture is genuinely valuable in a modern NFL offense. But what separates a receiver who is dangerous on paper from one who actually changes how defenses are structured is the ability to execute the difficult play with consistency in live situations. The contested catch, the back shoulder throw on a corner route where the ball is placed at the back pylon, and only the receiver, with the right combination of body control and hand strength, has a realistic chance to come away with it. That throw, executed correctly between a precise quarterback and a long striding vertical threat, is one of the most defensively difficult concepts in football. Everything about Mendoza's ball placement and touch on deep routes suggests he has the ability to deliver that ball at a high level. Thornton has the physical tools to be the receiver on that route. What these OTA sessions begin to tell us is whether the technical refinement is genuinely keeping pace with the athletic ceiling, or whether there's still a gap between what Thornton can do physically and what he can do reliably. Jack Bash is the name I keep returning to, and I've felt strongly about this for a while. What he brings in terms of route running intelligence, the quickness through his breaks, the body control in traffic, the reliability as an outlet when a young quarterback's primary read collapses under pressure, these qualities accumulate into target volume over the course of a full season inside a system like Kubiak's. A quarterback making his first NFL starts needs a receiver he trusts without hesitation in contested situations. Someone he can look toward when the play breaks down and the pocket closes faster than anticipated. Bash has the profile to become that receiver. His current standing in the public conversation significantly undervalues what I believe his actual ceiling is inside this specific offense. Give him a full season of genuine targets in this system, and I think the production will say something loudly about what this organization quietly already believes it has in him. Malik Benson is another player I'm tracking carefully. The speed is legitimate, the vertical threat potential is real, but what interests me most in the context of this specific offense is the combination of explosive playmaking and consistent special teams value. In a Kubiak system that wants to create big plays off play action, stress defenses horizontally, and get athletic players in space, a receiver who can change the outcome of a game in specific situations without requiring a featured role every single week is a genuinely useful piece of roster construction. It's about function rather than label. A player who forces the defense to account for him on every snap and contributes everywhere else when the ball isn't targeting him. That player has a real place in this offense and on this roster. The defensive side of this team is generating real excitement, and I want to give it the serious treatment it deserves. The linebacker pairing of Nakobe Dean and Key Walker is something I didn't anticipate being this fired up about entering the offseason. And the more I think about what that combination forces opposing coordinators to deal with, the more it registers as potentially one of the most underrated strengths on this entire football team. The athleticism and range those two bring, covering ground against the run, matching up in space against receiving backs and slot tight ends, handling coverage assignments that force most linebacker duos to rely heavily on safety help. That pairing could announce itself loudly by the middle of the season. Nobody in the national conversation is talking about it with real conviction yet. I think that changes. Jerron McCoy is the player I'm watching most carefully on the defensive side of the ball heading into these sessions. If he arrives at training camp healthy and fully operational, you are potentially looking at a cornerback who was considered first-round caliber talent before medical concerns repositioned him into the 4th round. A player who ran a 4.33 at his pro day and moved through rookie minicamp with a physical fluency that, by all accounts, left evaluators genuinely encouraged. The secondary depth surrounding him, Tradon Stokes, Dalton Johnson, Hezekiah Massas, gives this coverage group a competitive density that forces everyone at every level to perform at the top of their range just to hold their position on the roster. That kind of internal competition doesn't just identify the best players, it makes the entire group better over the course of a long training camp. Kieran Crawford at edge rusher is the storyline I believe deserves significantly more attention than it's currently receiving in the broader conversation. With Tyree Wilson gone and Malcolm Koonce operating on a 1-year deal, the role of genuine second edge rusher behind Max Crosby is legitimately open. Not a rotational piece who gets targeted on obvious 3rd and long situations, not a situational substitute. A legitimate starter-level presence who makes this defensive front dangerous from both sides of the formation and forces offensive coordinators to split their protection resources rather than committing everything they have toward taking Crosby away. Crawford has the developmental arc to support that kind of leap. OTAs are the first real professional environment to watch whether the growth evident throughout his college tape is continuing to compound in a professional setting. I'll be watching every available clip from these sessions closely. DJ Glaze enters camp as the right tackle frontrunner with 31 consecutive collegiate starts behind him, and he's earned the right to establish himself in that role before anyone challenges it. The depth around him, Charles Grant and Trey Zunn, both capable of contributing meaningfully at multiple positions, gives the offensive line a resilience over a full 17-game season that matters enormously when the injury reality of professional football asserts itself. Colton Miller at left tackle remains one of the most genuinely underappreciated foundational pieces on this entire roster. The interior being assembled around him, with Tyler Linderbaum locked in at center and real competition generating pressure across the guard positions, has legitimate potential to be a meaningfully improved unit from what Las Vegas fielded a year ago. That improvement, if it materializes, changes what this offense can do in ways that go far beyond the quarterback conversation. Here is where I actually land after sitting with all of this for a while. This roster is genuinely exciting in a way that goes beyond the optimism every fan base generates in the spring when nothing has gone wrong yet and the losses aren't real. The talent distributed across this depth chart is real. The competition within position groups is real. The organizational intelligence driving this entire offseason is visible in the specific details of how this roster is being constructed. Not patching holes with warm bodies, but building toward a defined identity with a coherent philosophical vision behind every decision that's been made. That is a meaningfully different kind of team-building process, and it shows in what we're watching develop across these early sessions. The quarterback situation remains the one unresolved question that everything else orbits around. Kubiak has told you his preferred outcome. Mark Davis has told you he wants Mendoza on the field. Those two positions exist in genuine tension with each other, and the OTAs, the mandatory minicamp, and ultimately training camp are going to generate the competitive information that forces a resolution in one direction or the other. What I believe, based on everything Mendoza has shown in the pre-OTA period, and in these early sessions, is that if he continues throwing the football the way his talent and preparation suggest he is capable of throwing it, the argument for keeping him on the sideline when September arrives is going to become increasingly difficult to sustain with any intellectual honesty. Coaching staffs construct plans. Quarterbacks who dramatically outperform those plans have a way of rewriting them entirely. Watch the open sessions carefully when they begin. Watch the rep distribution. Watch whether the story these practices are actually telling matches the story being told publicly in front of microphones. Those two stories are not always the same story. The answers are coming, and right now, in Las Vegas, the picture being assembled is worth every bit of the attention it's starting to demand.